Well, hello, everybody. Here we are, the three amigos, for another episode of our fun little group here. We're enjoying ourselves today. I'm going to be taking over and talking about the DISC behavioral assessment in order to help us as we move forward. Ron did something on the 16PF, which is a personality device that's actually used by psychologists. This is not a personality assessment, it's a behavioral assessment. So having said that, I want to move ahead and invite you to come along with me here as we move down the road. What I want you to know is that you can't get to where you want to go if you really don't know where you are. And I think one of the challenges I personally have seen in my life is that when people don't understand their behavioral preferences, it makes it a challenge to be able to really understand, first of all, why they do things they're doing. And more importantly, when you do it for a whole staff, they begin to understand and be more empathic to other people whose behavioral styles are different. And this is out of my Good Heart Leadership course. And basically, the intent is to engage followers in a noble purpose that's bigger than the differences among them. And for me, that's really important. Sometimes, we lose sight of that when we find that one person likes one thing and somebody else likes another, and we tend to make it personal. But I'll get into that in a moment. I just wanted to begin by getting everybody a sense as to where we're going. This is the Three Amigos value wheel, the 8 drivers of a business and an organization. And the DISC assessment is part of number 4 down there. It increases efficiencies, productivity, and quality by virtue of letting people know a little bit more about their style and how they prefer to behave. And so for me, it makes a lot of difference. As I say there on the bottom, good our leaders understand what matters to their staff and can then build a team of workforce warriors because they understand. You can't have a guy who's a quarterback who behaves the same way as a lineman. Those differences can be immense, and you don't want to interchange those positions because you won't build a very powerful team. I'm not sure. Let's see here. Moving ahead. All right, there we go. So we've all been in this situation in which somebody says something and people start looking sideways and say, what did you mean by that? And the point is that when you get the DISC, you can better understand how some people are very direct and say things without much thought, and others are very careful about what they say. And the differences can be difficult. What I'm trying to do here is good-hearted leaders increase the pool of shared meaning. In other words, when you're working together, you have to be able to have everybody on the same page in terms of what something means. And if we have style differences, sometimes those things can get in the way. And our goal here is to reduce that. So the purpose of our little seminar workshop here today is basically, I'm going to give you a chance to understand your own behavioral design. Second, it'll enable you to recognize, understand, and appreciate somebody else's design so that you can work with them. And the idea is to create a win-win, not to pigeonhole people and make them, oh, you're like this all the time, but rather to help us understand one another. And the next thing is we want to build no-collar safe cultures. And what I mean by that, we have this divide in work, white-collar workers and blue-collar workers, and sometimes that can get ugly. And ultimately, the best cultures are those in which there are no collars, in which people work together to make something happen. And then the final part here is how do we adapt our behavior to navigate stormy dialogue? We've all been in situations in which people get angry, and some people have different ways of behaving and reacting than others, and it can be very, very difficult. So what I'm trying to do here is how do I engage the wisdom of relationships and collaborators to really create that team of workforce warriors that we can all benefit from. So let me give you a little bit on the fundamentals. What do we do? This is a self-administered, and certainly, those who are psychologists, etc., feel that, a self-administered is not very accurate. My experience has been this, basically people fill it out based on what they feel is appropriate to themselves. I'm detail-oriented or I'm extroverted. And so when they get done, 90% of everybody I've ever had go through that says, yeah, this is like me. Those 10% that aren't, I ask them, well, did you do this or did you have somebody else do it for you? Why would you have picked something that isn't like you? And so typically they'll go back, and when they do it again, they'll have a better result than they had in the first time. Each survey pattern has its own strengths and weaknesses. And this is so important. Results are about differences in behavior, not character. What I mean by that is that it's sadly when I make a mistake, and I'm sure Ron and Ed, you've had this situation.
Oh
It's
no,
not.
we've never made a mistake before.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Uh, but the truth is, when that happens, we tend to think of it. Well, it was just me. It was an anomaly. It was like if I can bring this up, Ron. It was like poor Molly walking down to take a look at the river and falling. It wasn't intentional, but it happened, and so now she's got to recover from that. And I think sometimes that happens to us too. We make mistakes, but the problem is when people see us make a mistake, they sometimes think it's part of our character. Oh, he's always like that, or she's always like that. Well, the truth is, we tend to react in similar ways, but the fact of the matter is, it's not about our character, it's about behavior and how we can adjust it. So there are 4 principles here and that we can all relate to. Everyone is motivated. And I think there was a wonderful bumper sticker that's now many, many decades old, but it says, everybody needs to believe in something. I believe I'll have another beer. So the point is we're all motivated, and we're motivated for our reasons, not yours. And so that's really important. When you understand what motivates people and their behavioral style will give you some ideas, it'll make it easier for you to understand. People's behavior, what they do tends to remain stable. I know you've done the 16 PF, Ron. I've done the disc probably 6 or 7 times over the past 30 years, and my style has remained very, very consistent. I would say the 16 PF does the same thing, unless you're lying, in which case it'll change. And the final thing is meanings aren't people, not words. And it's important that we understand when people do things, their meanings are intent and part of their motivation. And it's not about the words. When I say mother, it has a very different connotation in my mind than somebody who may have been beaten by his mother when he was a young person. So you have to be real careful about how you assume things when you move into this. There are 4 observable things. The good news about this is that once you become more comfortable with this process, you can pretty much identify the person's style by listening to the tone of their voice, the pace at which they speak, the words they use, and their body and face language. Those are all things that are observable. And with the behavioral assessment, you don't have to have the report. You can watch them, and in 10 minutes, you'll know kind of what they are. I've gone into people's offices, and you can tell just by going in their office, without even talking to them, what their style is like. Is their desk messy? They have things on the wall. So there's lots of ways in which you can kind of judge a person's preference in terms of behavior, and then adapt your communication to make that more effective. So there are 4 elements of this. And as you can see, you're starting on the red D. It's how dominance is how people handle problems. The I is about how people deal with people. The S is how people deal with change and pace. And the C is how people deal with rules and procedures. So this graph is mine. You can see it's different. Everybody's will be kind of different based on their particular style. So what I want you to see here is that in ours, there are 2 graphs. One is on the left, it's called your adapted style, and on the right, it's called your natural style. So what the left side says is that's the mask. In other words, when people are in a work environment and they want to kind of keep their behavior different, they will hide their behavior because it makes more sense for them and it may work for them in their environment. The right side, graph 2, is your natural. That's kind of who you really are. The left side is based on your most responses, and the right side is based on least. And what I mean by that is I can remember my kids when they were younger would say, Dad, what are we having for dinner? And I said, I don't know. What do you want? I don't know. And I'd say, okay, let's have hot dogs. Hot dogs? We don't want hot dogs. Right? So, we all know what we don't want, right? So the least side is kind of who you really are. So we kind of focus on that because that's where a person's real behavior kind of stems from. So here's I want you to look a little bit about the D. The D is kind of a let's just go for it. Person who is high up here where you see the little bubble on the top, they want to just go for it. They don't plan, they just go ahead and they use language that's very direct. If you look at the bottom, The bottom people who are low on D tend to be, we need to examine this first and look at it very closely. It's a very different way of looking at the world, and it can create conflict if you don't understand that about the person who's responding. The I, on the other hand, are people who are very enthusiastic. They're extroverted. I like to say they will talk out loud. You know, they'll think out loud. Our business is going to explode. I can just feel it, right? And you look at the other side, though, and they'll say, well, that's nice, but can you show me the facts to back it up? You know, it's a very different way of looking at the world. When you get to the S's want teamwork, they want loyalty, they want, they're interested in security. They'll say, great idea. Can we form a team? Make sure we get it all together in a detailed plan of action. The bottom half of that, when you're low on S, we don't have time. Let's move on now. We got to get this thing done. The C, on the other hand, is a real rule-oriented. This is a person who is great in quality control. You know, we have procedures and rules that are intended to be followed. When you look at the bottom, they're guidelines. You know, as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, let's change it. So, you know, those are all very, very different ways of looking at the world. And those behavioral preferences, as you can imagine, have huge consequences inside the organization if we don't understand that people are doing this with the intention of trying to express their natural tendencies. And when you become more aware of that, you can help them move more effectively forward. So, our leaders learn how to adapt their behavior. And I've got this quote from Marilyn Ferguson that's always been resonated with me. No one can persuade another to change. Each of us guards a gate of change that can only be opened from the inside. We cannot open the gate of another by argument or emotional appeal. So what I'm saying by that is the more we understand a person's behavioral preferences, we'll try to align our communication with that to help them understand why we may want to go in a different direction or what our purpose is. Guys, I've kind of gone through this rapidly, but do you have any questions on this so far, or should I just carry on, as we say?
And I just want to make one observation. That was a very good presentation, Ray, and it really highlights how important this subject matter is. It makes you kind of wonder, before anyone even gets married or makes any commitments of that nature, you almost should do one of these DISC surveys to see how compatible you are. And it does bring up a lot of issues that cause a lot of arguments over time. If you're a high I and a low I, you got areas where you differ, and which could cause arguments. That's very
interestingly enough, what I've found is that people tend to look for somebody who's different than they are. In part, sometimes what I've experienced is that they're looking for somebody who kind of fills a hole in them that's different than their own. And while it's really fun when the rose is still, when the blush is still on the rose, it's not so much fun when you've been married 6 or 8 or 10 years and you find that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that I use this tool for, and I find it's very effective, is that it's really important that when you do a job interview, my experience has been if the people that sit down together and do a DISC beforehand and say what kind of behavior is what is most important to this job, as an example, an accountant, and then try to find somebody whose profile closely matches that, your chances of getting somebody who's suitable for the position improves dramatically. So
I think that is probably the most important takeaway from the slides you've gone through, is that there are differences in behavior, and the descriptive words there really make that very clear on the last couple of slides, so that it's very easy for a manager or somebody who's involved in hiring to think about the kind of behavior that they expect in a particular job, and then realize that different people have different behavioral styles, and they will or won't fit in that job easily. The natural tendency for most businesses, I think we've all run into this, is that you start with an interview, and you cannot tell anything about a person through an interview. You can get about from anywhere from 2 to 5% accuracy from watching somebody sit in front of you and have a conversation. They've got their best smile on. They're giving you all the positive feedback that you want. They get you talking about the company, and then pretty soon you're selling them on the company when you're really there to become sold on the employee for the specific job.
Right.
So starting with an interview process is perhaps one of the biggest wastes of time that businesses make. Now that goes counter to a whole lot of people who are professionals in HR. But I'm I'm convinced after studying this very, very closely for about 20 years now that and having been involved in hundreds of hires, that that in fact is the case. That the interview is the last thing you do; it's not the first thing you do.
Yeah.
So you start you start with the assessment
Right.
so that you can get a sense for who they are, how and how they behave. The increase in successful hires soars
Yes.
when you recognize that your job is not to hire someone, your job is to find someone who fits that job.
Right.
And so many small businesses are patriarchal in the sense, and I don't mean that it's a male dominated thing. I don't mean that, but it's patriarchal in the sense that they think that work style is just a certain thing, the way they work.
Yeah.
You know, they come in early, they work hard all day, and they leave late, and that's what everybody else should do. But the truth of the matter is that some of them can come in and sit at the desk, and if they're not detail oriented, they're going to do a terrible job as an accountant. And it doesn't matter whether or not they have the owner's work ethic or not; they're just not going to fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, that's why this is so important. Is that you can tell where somebody is behaviorally and a little bit about skill, but behaviorally appropriate for a job because and we've talked about this before, but Rich Trafton, who I worked with for a long, long time on these kinds of subjects, has made the observation that you can put a person in a job that is not suited for them, and they can do it for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, all those four scales that you have there, they're not yes or no. They're graded kind of through. That's why they've got a number on them. So they've got So we're all a little bit different on each one of these things. And his point is that if you're not, say, suited to be a manager, you might be able to do it for a while. You can hold your arms out, but you can't. None of us can hold our arms out forever.
Yeah.
So, to the degree that you're not suited to be a manager, you will eventually drop your arms and eventually yell at somebody or do something stupid.
Yeah.
It's true with any job.
No, I
You
agree.
can try to fit a job for a while, but you can't be fulfilled in that job in the long term.
Yes, and one of the observations I would make is that typically the D's and I's interview more effectively than the S and C's. What I mean by that, the S and C's by nature are introverted, so they're inclined not to say anything unless specifically asked. For the D's and I's really interview well, but the point you made, they are terrible in an accounting role because they don't like details, they don't want to be carved down, and they don't want to be sitting in an office.
Right.
So you make that hire, and what my experience working with Nokia was, they say, you hire for technical skills and then you fire for fit.
Yeah.
90 days down the road, you're going, oh my God, what have we done here? So the more you use these tools at the front end, the less likely it is you'll have to make an adjustment 90 days down the road. And we all know, replacing somebody, I've been told is 1 year's of salary at least because of the loss of time, the loss of training, the loss of ability. So, that's why we are committed to doing this, and I think it can be a very effective approach. Let me go. We still have.
I have a little bit different take on how I've used it in my career. Rather than using it for a specific job, we have used it for team building.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And
very good for that.
When you have an upper management team that is working together on the behalf of the corporation, trying to add value, build value, and reduce risk, it's really important that the the top managers work well with one another as a team. And if they're all high D's and high I's, it's pretty hard sometimes to get beyond that.
Yes.
A lot of conflict is brought into the process, which shouldn't happen. So you just become aware of it by doing the assessment of your operating team, and you find out what they're like, everybody's like, and you try to figure out a way to get everybody together to work together as a team.
Yeah, and Ray mentioned this, but you can take that comment and overlay it with what he said about communication. You know, if you understand different people, then the team members can communicate in different ways with different team members
Right.
and attempt to get along a little bit better. Because many times you have to have people from all of these different categories on one team.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so you've got to figure this out, and it's harder to do when the team has to be together and they all have different behaviors.
Right. And I think one of the things, what you'll see here, now we're going to get into the conflict area. And I agree totally with what both of you said. You know, the more you understand one another, the less likely you're going to explode when something goes off the rails, because you realize, you know, gosh, that's the way that person is. So, you know, one of the things that I took this is from a book on communication. You know, the truth is, good heart leaders mitigate conflict when the stakes are high, when things are really, emotions are running strong, and opinions are polarized. You know, and those happen. And as Ed said, and I know that Ron and I have seen it, when those things happen inside of organizations, the D's and the I's tend to dominate and may do something foolish or stupid.
Yeah.
You know, so that's dangerous. But basically, typical conflict response patterns, in my experience, the D's tend to fight verbally, they get defensive, and they get emotional. You know, and the high I's, they will tend to withdraw and run away from fight. High S's tend to be accommodating. And so the D's will kind of dominate the organization and actually dominate what happens, you know. And the high C's will avoid and remain stone-faced. You don't know what's going on. You know, so as you watch this happen inside of an organization, it can have enormous consequences, some of which are devastating, because you'll have people leave, or there'll be fights and people won't be able to move forward. So how do you manage this? Well, the question is, and here's one of the examples that I like to use, in which you can really see the importance of understanding the different dimensions and how that behaves in a different way. Now, look at it. If you move furniture, the first thing a D says, well, that's great, you know, and the I says, you mean something moved here? And the S says, hey, wait a minute, I was just getting used to this. And the C says, who did this? If it's a good job, the D says, well, of course, I know. And the I says, well, tell me more. And the S says, will it be on my check? And the C says, if I had just a little more time, I could have done it better, right?
That's great.
Yeah.
So if you get to a manual, right, the D says, what for? We don't need any stinking manuals. And the I says, well, I know it was here someplace. I'm not sure if it's on the desk or what. The I says, I was revising it. And the C says, what section were you looking for?
Yeah.
So if you do a boat race, the D just gets in and he goes the wrong direction without ever paying any attention to what's going on. The I says, wow, who's going? Maybe we can have a party. The S begins racing, and the C is out there checking wind direction.
Yeah, this is great.
That is great.
Yeah.
I love that.
I'm thinking, as you're going through this, I'm thinking of examples over all the years, you know, that I've run into all of these things and the personalities behind them, you know, it's like, oh my gosh.
Well, and and the point is, you know, this is humorous, but, you know, we've all been in situations where there is no humor, and it can be devastating. And so the reason I've used this particular tool for 30 years is because the aha experience I get from people who read it. You know, we start our Good Heart Leadership this way because basically it's all about them. And they read this and they go, wow, this is just like me. And it helps them, you know, really feel more comfortable, and they can share it with somebody who they work with, and they go, so that's why. it's like the D's like to use I. I'll be doing this and I'll be doing that. And the S's are going, why doesn't he ever say we? But it's not in his nature to do that. It's not a good or bad thing. It's just, it's like, well, I was going to do this.
Yeah.
Oh, these are very good examples when you're coaching people, how you can better work together to accomplish goals and objectives. And,
Mhm.
and if you understand the way people are and their natural state of being, you can figure out ways how you can work together by making sure everybody's on the same page. And that's what we're really talking about here, making sure everybody's on the same page.
Yes.
Well, I would go one more possibility. It's nice to be able to say we all want to kumbaya, but this also helps you find out which team member needs to go.
Yes.
Okay, so you can't really hope that everybody's going to always be able to be perfect with each other, and many times it only takes one person out of it on a team of six to destroy the whole thing so that it doesn't work. And we've all had to make those decisions. And sometimes understanding a little bit more about the depth of who somebody is helps you make the right decision. Sort of coach versus fire. Where do we go with this person? They're blocking what we're trying to do. Their company objectives. This person is not helping, and sometimes they just need to be more. They need to be successful some other place. Yeah. And that's kind of the way it works. And everybody's happy because they can be successful somebody place else. They're not a bad person, but they may not fit with the team.
Exactly. I think one of my experiences, Ron, in smaller organizations, ultimately, I think you have to let people like that go. In larger ones, you can try to move them to another organization or another department where they may be a better fit. But ultimately, they will continue to create problems for the group that they're in. So
I think in my experience, as long as people are honest when you're meeting with them, I think there's a way to work around things and challenges. But when you find out people are holding court behind the scenes, saying something differently because their personality doesn't match with the other personality, that's a real problem.
Yeah.
I think, didn't you refer to those as store monkeys, Ed?
Yeah, I had a friend, Gary Moore, who was an advertising guru in the newspaper business, and he came up with that term sewer monkeys, and I think he was right on. That is something you got to avoid. You have to make sure everybody's on the same page, working together as a team. And if they're not, like Ron said, you have to seriously thinking about making a change.
Right, and to the point, as Ron said, you got to terminate them, or else they, it's like that one rotten apple will spoil the barrel.
Yeah.
All right, let's this is about it, guys. Basically, my hope here is for everybody to understand. If somebody would like their own disc link, if they email me, I will send that to them, and they can do their own disc. I'd be happy to give them a 30-minute debrief if that's of value to them. And then I want to conclude with that. Remember, you are the gift that keeps on giving, and if you're a good fit, like Ed and Ron were both saying, you can make an enormous difference on a team. If you're not, you can completely destroy it. So having said that, I think this is about where I feel at this point we can really help people become more cohesive as a team, and that's part of what I've tried to do with this Good Heart Leadership course, is help them understand once they know each other and we can move it through a little bit at a time, they'll become more effective both as a team and as an organization.
Yeah.
Well done.
Good job. Well done.
Well, thank you.
See you all next time. Huh?
Yeah. Thank you much.
You bet.
Bye.